for returning. So, just a little quick note. People ask me, what kind of Indian are you? Yukon, Apache, Pumano, Alabama, Kashada. So, just like all of us, we're all mixed blood with so many different tribes, so many different Europeans as well. And also, once we get up here, I want to talk to Dr. Carlson about what he's wearing. I've done different reenactments with him, but I haven't seen this one. So anyway, our second presenter is Dr. David Carlson. And his title of the presentation, From Clandestine Backer to Overt Co-Belligerence, Spain and the American Revolution, 1776 to 1783. A short bio. Dr. Carlson is an independent scholar in San Antonio, Texas for over a dozen years. He served as the archivist of the Spanish archives in Bexar County. He's also a historian of 19th century Latin America. Dr. Carlson is also an avid genealogist who has assisted many people with family history. I can vouch for that. Tracks so many different people. He is an avid reader, researcher, and also enjoys travel, hiking, bicycling, living history, reenactments, and muzzle-loading firearms. He is currently working as an exhibitor developer for the Alamo Trust. Dr. David Carlson.
Thank you very much, everyone, and thank you for coming. I'm very honored to be here to address your meeting. I gave a really Geertzian thick description of the siege and battle of Pensacola from the 8th of March, 1781 until the British surrender on the 10th of May, 1781. For the local San Antonio chapter of the Granaderos y Damas de Galvez, and strangely, they asked me to come back. So I was honored to accept that request. Those of you looking at my shirt sleeves must be, especially if you're from Spain, you must be thinking, oh, he must be an Atletico de Madrid fan. That's why he's got the red and white stripes. But what I'm trying to do is to reference the Cruz de Borgoña flag. And then, of course, the 13 red and white stripes of the U.S. banner. So that's kind of what I'm trying to tie together with the stripy shirt. So at any rate, I'm going to go ahead and start my presentation. It's mostly going to be a synthesis of this developing understanding of the role that Spain played in the American Revolutionary War, tying down British forces, diverting British naval resources, basically helping to finance and bankroll the Continentals during the years of struggle. And I'm not going to be as granular as Dr. Galan's presentation, where we're like deep into the frontier of Texas and looking at these wonderful primary sources and documents. But hopefully we can address some of the questions that are arising. I also want to mention, I think, as you know, I work as an exhibit developer. My friend and coworker and boss, Nathan, is here, and I was just really overwhelmed to see the work that he's done on this forthcoming exhibit set for next year to open at the Alamo. The Alamo has a cat, Bella, and so I feel like, okay, we have a cat named Bella. Can I let the cat out of the bag about the exhibit? See what I did there. So I'm honored, and with this august body of people, to tell you that there's going to be an America 250 exhibit in July of 2026, Hermanos en Armas. And it's going to be an exploration of the role of Spanish Texas, the role of the Spanish Empire writ large, and of course it's a very large empire, and their assistance and aid to the patriots in the American Revolution. So it should be a great exhibit. The other thing I wanted to mention is that the day after tomorrow, they're going to have the latest Ken Burns documentary series premiering on PBS, and it's all about the American Revolution. They're styling it an intimate history. It looks a little bit to me like Peter England's book about World War I that was done during the centennial of World War I, but they've really gone to try to find primary sources that have not been emphasized by histories in the past. And of course, you guys can all hold them to what they do about the Third Coast and about Spain's participation in the American Revolution. So it should be pretty interesting. All right, to begin, people often ask, why is it the case that the Spanish participation in the American Revolutionary War as an ally of France and a co-belligerent of the Continental Congress and the Continental Army, why isn't this more widely understood or broadly understood by the rest of the US population? What gives? I mean, if you were going to make a movie, a Hollywood movie about the American Revolution, why not Bernardo de Galvez, right? I mean, pretty extraordinary stuff, as you know. I mean, definitely made for the big screen. And so I wanted to start with this slide and address the depth of the division for much of the history of the settlement of the Americas and the New World between Protestantism and Catholicism. And that was an extremely deep division. And you know, these days I don't think we really understand how intractable this religious division was for much of the country's history. So I have here a reminder that Spain and the United Kingdom, England before 1707, fought many, many, many wars. They fought wars well before the 18th century, and they fought wars in the 18th century, and it created this like enduring mindset that they were somehow almost traditional enemies. You know, they were rivals. So up here I've got Admiral Edward Old Grog Vernon. He was apparently given the nickname Old Grog because he wore a Grogingham cloak, and his nickname, Old Grog, Grogingham, is the name of the old rum ration in the Royal Navy that the sailors would get every day. You know, and he leads a British fleet in the Caribbean during the so-called War of Jenkins' Ear. You know, England is going to go to war with Spain, and they need a casus belli, and they find that there's some ship captain that years ago supposedly had one of his ears cut off by a Spaniard off the coast of Cuba. And so then this is hyped and promoted as like, you know, the latest, you know, terrible thing that needs to be avenged. And the United Kingdom uses this excuse to go full bore into an attempt to hive off lots of Spanish real estate in the Caribbean. And they take colonial militia from North America with them. So American born, in Spanish they'd be criollos, but American born people in uniform with American militia are part of the English war effort. One of them is an older half-brother of George Washington from Virginia by the name of Lawrence Washington, okay? And so if you've ever wondered, why do they call George Washington's family home Mount Vernon? It's to honor Admiral Vernon.
My goodness.
That's why it's
my
Mount
goodness.
Vernon, okay? So like that's the name, and that's like the legacy, the backstory, if you will, of Anglo North American participation as subjects of the British Empire. Now, if you guys ever go to Cartagena de Indias in the Caribbean coast of Colombia, you will find this guy, this statue, and that's my attempt at taking a picture. This is Blas de Lezo. The joke in Spanish Latin America is Blas de Lezo is why we still speak Spanish in South America. It falls to him, a Spanish commander, to defeat Vernon at Cartagena, okay? And Blas de Lezo is absolutely the embodiment of like Spanish valentia and bravery and pluck. I often make the comment that every single body part that you have two of, he was missing one. He's missing an eye, he's missing a hand, he's got a peg leg. I mean, he is shot up. You know, he really is.
Monty Python.
But he is the commander at this battle in Cartagena and defeats the British. So it's just to point out that, as Dr. Galan mentioned, there are these body blows that each side has delivered to each other. And it will explain a lot about why diplomacy developed the way it did during the American Revolutionary War. Okay, I don't have a really nice color map like Dr. Galan, so, you know. You'll recall Dr. Galan showed us this map before, and he mentioned this line of presidios that, as he said, were established by the 1772 regulations. And so the whole purpose of this was, again, piggybacking on Dr. Galan's comments, the Bourbon reforms are an attempt to make things more efficient. They're to rebuild the armed forces, rebuild the navy, and basically put Spain on a better footing should there be another entirely predictable war with Great Britain. And the security concern for the frontier is antagonistic equestrian Indian groups, the Lipan Apaches and the Shoshonean Comanche. But they decide they're going to build presidios, cavalry forts, manned by mounted forces who can basically fight the Indians on their own terms. And they're going to put them 100 miles apart so that they can mutually reinforce each other. And this is a very, very ancient idea. This goes back to antiquity and the Romans, you know. But this is the plan. And then they have this issue that arises where Santa Fe in New Mexico and San Antonio de Béjar and the Villa de San Fernando after 1731 are north of that line. And so they're like odd out. So they decide to keep them going simply because they are population centers that seem to be doing reasonably well, and they don't want to like negate that. Again, after the French and Indian War, the 7 Years' War comes to an end, all of the territory to the west of the Mississippi River becomes Spanish, where heretofore it had been French, okay? But there's a complication. The Spanish bureaucracy decides that New Spain, ruled by a virrey, a viceroy from Mexico City, controls all of this territory, including the Provincia de Texas. But what had heretofore been French Louisiana is going to be governed from Havana in Cuba. And so given how the mercantilist trade that Spain presided over functioned, that meant there technically wasn't supposed to be trade between Texas and Louisiana, right? And so small wonder that people like Gilly Barbo and so on are like, we're going to trade with our neighbors that are like right over there. But this is smuggling, this is contraband trade as far as the Spanish crown is concerned. And so it takes a while, but effectively during the course of the American Revolution, and thanks in small part to the cattle drives, the Spanish crown is going to decide, couldn't we just tax this trade and make it legal? And then the crown would get some money out of the deal? And that's what happens, effectively, because of the contingencies of the war with Great Britain. Okay. All right. When, after 15 years of intense organization, committees of correspondence, Sons of Liberty, tax protests, all of this tumult going on in the 13 colonies, because England is trying to get more wealth and more money from everyone to pay for the cost of the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War. The American colonists effectively start to impede and oppose the Crown's plans in the 13 colonies. And so before too long, blood is shed. There's the Boston Massacre in 1770, on and on and on. And in 1773, there's the Boston Tea Party. So the British Crown effectively decides that the colonists are in rebellion, and they have got to exercise punitive measures to bring them to heel. So they pass what were known as the Intolerable Acts. And one of the Intolerable Acts is to close the port of Boston to commerce. Like, take that, port city. And they don't let fishermen go to sea to catch fish. So like, you're facing ruination, okay? Eventually, the British decide to disarm some of the more obstreperous colonists, and famously, they march out on the 19th of April, 1775, to go secure stores of powder and small cannon that are with the militia in Lexington and Concord, Massachusetts. And the shot around the world is fired, there's a running battle, and suddenly the American Revolution is an armed conflict, okay? Without rehearsing all of the battles in that first year, there's an April 1775 to the 3rd of July, 1775, the creation of the Continental Army and putting General George Washington in command of it, and then the year and a day after that, literally proclaiming independence, national independence, and seeking to go their own way. The Patriots are in a completely lopsided, totally outclassed situation by the power of Great Britain. The Royal Navy at the time is the largest and most powerful navy in the world. They had posted regulars in the colonies. More are going to be sent. They are going to hire mercenary troops, renting troops from small German principalities. So like the Hessians are the classic example. In the case of the siege and the battle for Pensacola, they're going to be Waldeckers. They're going to be from Waldeck, okay? So they're going to get German princes to receive money from the British Crown to send parts of their army over to fight under British command, okay? And then in addition, there's simply just a lot of people in the 13 colonies who are loyalists, and they are not persuaded by the Patriots. And a lot of them want to stick with the Crown, and they want to stick with their conception of patriotism, which is support for the British King and his prerogatives. So all of that is weighted very, very heavily against the rebels, okay? Enter the first foreign aid received by the American Patriots. 2 days, the 17th of April, 1775, before the battle on Lexington Green. A bunch of unemployed, thrown out of work, bacalao, cod fishermen in Marblehead, Massachusetts, write a merchant in Bilbao, in Spain, who they know, because the Basques are all over the bacalao trade, as you might expect, right? I mean, it may be that Columbus was using a Basque map when he discovered America. The Basques weren't about to let their prime fishing spot in the Labrador Banks be like an open piece of information to share with just anyone. But the Basques cut a deal with these people in Bilbao, in Marblehead, to send from Bilbao weapons. 300 stands of arms, that's a musket, the bayonet, and the cartridge box, and 600 pairs of pistols, and gunpowder from Plasencia, Guipúzcoa, in the Basque Country, to people in Massachusetts. So this is the very first support that comes from a foreign source to the colonists, okay? What you're gonna see develop is that Spanish ministers, so the Conde de Aranda in France and the Conde de Florida Blanca in Madrid are going to tap Diego Maria de Gardoqui to be the go-between with the Americans. He's done it, he's got the connections, he has interests as an iron merchant, he's selling pig iron, he's selling iron ore, he's also selling codfish. He's got the network with the Americans, and Spain has to be very mindful that they share a lot of borders with British North America. And if they open hostilities with Great Britain too early, they're going to lose. They're going to lose, and they're going to lose national territory. They're going to have the British hiding off more of their real estate in their empire. And so initially, it's like many things in history, there's a complexity to it that I'm not doing justice to, but effectively, the minister in France gets wind that the Continentals are sending people to talk to the French. And he's of the opinion, look, the British have their hands full with their obstreperous colonists. This is going to be the best time, and it may in fact be the only time, that Spain could really make war against Great Britain and succeed. This might be the only ephemeral moment that we're going to have at this point. And then the ministers in Madrid, with the ear of the king, Carlos III, are like, let's just wait, okay? Let's make sure that we preserve the appearance of neutrality, and that nobody can castigate us as like supplying rebels and all of that stuff. So that's kind of what's going on in the court. When Arthur Lee, unmarried, single, shows up in Spain, he meets Diego Maria de Gardoqui at his wife's house in Vitoria in the Basque Country, okay? And his wife, Brigida Orueta, and her father basically host this secret diplomacy between the American rebels and Spanish merchants, with tacit backing of the Spanish crown, to carry on an illicit source of supply to the American rebels. And so, run this forward, that diplomacy, that diplomatic connection grows and grows, and you should be aware that this man, Diego Maria de Gardoqui, is the very first envoy from Spain to the independent United States. He's the first Spanish official to be at an American inauguration when George Washington becomes the president, okay? And then what boggles my mind, and what I think speaks to the division that I mentioned at the start of the talk between Protestantism and Catholicism, he lays the groundstone for the very first Catholic church in New York City. Now, think about that for a minute. 1785, there were no Catholic churches in New York. I mean, if you've been to New York, that's kind of shocking. Like, what do you mean there were no Catholic churches here? I mean, there sure are a lot now, right?
Yeah.
So, 1785, he lays the cornerstone of the first Catholic church in New York. Okay, now we get to another source of trade networks. And to talk about this, we're going to go again with Dr. Galland's points about the siege and the battle and the taking by the British of Havana in 1762. Okay, when I was a graduate student, I was doing archival research in Havana at their National Archives, and I was befriended by a very elderly military historian who unfortunately has since passed, Panchito, and he said to me, listen, okay, you're researching history, and a lot of it is military, but by your own admission, you're not a military historian. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm a dilettante when it comes to military history. And he said, well, don't ever overlook, you've got to go out into the field and you've got to experience the actual conditions. You've got to like walk the battlefield. You've got to understand how this played out. And of course, this is in the back of my mind when I get involved in living history, right? This is like a seed that's sown. He tells me, listen, I was researching the British siege of Havana during the 7 Years' War, and I actually went out in a small boat, and I went along the coast to see what it looked like from the British perspective. I landed at Coquimar, just like the British Army did. I marched inland over to the Cabañas Fortress in Havana, which was built after Spain got Havana back. They were like, that's never going to happen again. We're going to build this huge, enormous fortress to make sure the British don't ever pull this off again. And then, of course, that fort is never actually used in a battle. But that's the way of these things, At any rate, during this period, when, as Dr. Galland mentioned, the British have free trade going in Havana, an Irish American by the name of Oliver Pollock shows up from Pennsylvania. He was originally born in Ireland. He's an Irish Protestant. He goes to Pennsylvania, and before too long, he recognizes there is a lot of money that is going to be made in the Caribbean trade. So that's where he comes in. He meets an Irish Catholic woman, Margaret O'Brien, and they fall in love, and they decide that they're going to get married, and it's a good marriage for other reasons as well, right? And he converts to Catholicism in order to marry her, okay? While he is in Havana, control of the port city changes from British back to Spanish hands. And the Spanish send crown officials, including this Irishman, Alejandro O'Reilly from County Tyrone, who served in the French army, the Austrian army, and the Spanish army. So he's one of these wild geese. He's an Irishman who fights in foreign armies, okay? He becomes a leading general, not always successful by any means, but he becomes a leading general in the Spanish army, and eventually he becomes a conde, and he's ennobled by the Spanish crown. So he is then delegated, after he meets Oliver Pollock, to go to New Orleans. And he arrives in New Orleans, where the French settlers and colonists in Louisiana are refusing to acknowledge Spanish sovereignty, and they're basically in rebellion. So it falls to him to hang 5 people in Louisiana to make an example of them, that we're the Spanish and we're running the show now. So if you're in New Orleans, he's Bloody O'Reilly, okay? But, he's also a friend of Bernardo Damas, and he's also a go-between with Oliver Pollock. And so he's the guy who's setting up these trade networks that are going to be of such tremendous importance to the rebel cause. I'm going to go ahead and go past this. What did I do? Okay, briefly, the French, for their part, are also involved in supplying the rebels. Literally, right after the 4th of July, 1776, both the Kingdom of Spain and France agree that each of them will provide 1 million livres, French livres, in silver to back the rebels. But again, they're doing this clandestinely, hush hush. One of the entrepôts for this illicit trade with the rebels is a Dutch possession in the Antilles, which at the time was mostly called Statia, which is a lot easier than saying Saint Eustatius or Saint Eustatius. So Statia is this golden rock that allows for these ships to meet and supply these goods. Okay. So a lot can be said about the machinations of French foreign policy and Spanish foreign policy, and you can look at this situation as, a very old and ancient tale of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. If England has its hands full with its rebel colonists, well, let's not hit England. Let's kick them. It's easier, right? I mean, they're down. They have their hands full. There's also the side from the American Continentals as well. And so I wanted to mention that it's in their interests to go get this trade as well. And they're actively seeking this out. So we have letters that are in Spanish archives where American officials are carrying out this trade, and they're also offering inducements to Spain. Maybe you could get Florida back. That would be a way to sweeten any deal between us and Spain. Okay. The aid that is provided from New Orleans up the Mississippi River, down the Ohio, up the Ohio River, to places which now are Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Western Pennsylvania, and Wheeling, West Virginia, supplying George Rogers Clark and his Western campaign, supplying powder and shot and guías, like footwear for troops, and frazadas militares, like blankets, uniforms, all of the materiel, all of the materiales bélicos that are supplying the Continental Army from Statia, from ports in Spain, and from Cuba and from New Orleans, helped the Continental Army gain its first salient victory, and that is the Battle of Saratoga, fought in upstate New York from September through October 1777. And so when the United States, when the Continental Army is able to defeat a major British land army in North America, the French decide that they're going to become an ally of the United States. In 1778, that they're going to take Great Britain to war, and that they're going to openly side with the Americans, the American patriots. Spain, meanwhile, is sounding out Britain like, hey, you know what's coming. You know that France and maybe even us are going to go to war with you sooner or later. Maybe there is a way where Spain could mediate this whole situation and prevent a wider war. So, you would give us Gibraltar back, which you had since the War of the Spanish Succession. You would treat with the Continentals as though they were independent, even though you don't recognize them as independent. And furthermore, we would just stop and we would keep all of the land and all of the territory that we currently have. Okay? England is not going for it. England rejects this offer at mediation. With the addition of France and the following year Spain into open hostilities with Great Britain, the British have to rethink and recalibrate their entire strategy. Okay? And honestly, I don't think anyone in this room is surprised by this, but without understanding the French and the Spanish participation and the globalization of the conflict, there's a lot about the American Revolution that just doesn't make sense. So, if you're like me, I grew up with these wonderful books. They make no mention of Spain whatsoever. It's all, the minutiae of all these battles that are fought in the 13 colonies. I went to the Battle of Monmouth when I was a kid. I was totally into all this stuff. And they never brought it up, they never mentioned it. And so you'll read a book and you're like, oh, this British General Clinton, he was so silly. Why did he do this? Well, he had to, because France and Spain entered into his calculations, right? So suddenly he has to send 5,000 troops from New York to the Caribbean. Why on earth would you send 5,000 troops from New York when you're fighting against George Washington? Well, because you're not just fighting George Washington anymore, right? All right, Bernardo de Galvez, again, I'm not telling, this group knows this better than I do, right? I mean, you guys are like a brain trust when it comes to understanding Bernardo de Galvez. As was mentioned, his uncle, Jose, is at various times, the governor of the Provincias Internas and head of the organization for the Indies. And his father, Matias, is at various times, in various posts. So in a certain way, Bernardo de Galvez is a golden boy, right? I mean, he has family connections that are just impeccable, like an ancient lineage that long tied to the Spanish military out of Malaga, he's this uniquely situated individual. But with that said, it has to be owed that he was really, really brilliant in a lot of his undertakings. He goes to Louisiana and takes over from Luis de Gonzaga, okay? Right away, he's concerned about the security of Spanish Louisiana and New Orleans, okay? He begins to write letters. Can we recruit Isleños, Canary Islanders, and have them sent here as settlers? Didn't we do this with 56 people in Texas in 1731 because we were worried about the French? Well, now we're worried about the English, right? They were a little further to the east. The Comanches would doubtless have been added to that. But he gets Isleños, and as was mentioned, a lot of these people, their descendants today, the Isleños today, live in St. Bernard Parish. And there is Galveztown, and Galveztown is like this polyglot community. There are American loyalists that are pro-British. There's people that are secret patriot sympathizers. There's people from Germany and Switzerland, from the German coast. There are Acadiens, people who are French speakers, francophones, that were effectively deported from near Halifax because they lived too close to the British Navy in the site of the British Northern Squadron in Halifax, and it was a security threat to have French-speaking Catholics living there. So off they go to Louisiana, and of course this is the group that becomes the Cajuns later on. Okay, Bernardo de Galvez is knitting all of these disparate groups of people together into the militia, into a working alliance. He's trying to inspire people. He's inspiring people who are kind of hesitant about what Spanish sovereignty has to offer, okay? Apparently he's making some moves I wasn't aware of with Gili Barbo, okay? So he marries a charming widow, young widow, who happens to be the daughter of one of the wealthiest French descendants in Louisiana, okay? And they have children together. And he's making these connections work. And what I think is really fascinating about Bernardo de Galvez, his idea of defending New Orleans is, we're gonna have to make the first move. We're gonna have to be offside on the play. No one is gonna call it back, okay? So we're gonna have to eliminate the British from the Mississippi. We can't just wait passively for things to happen. If we do that, we're doomed, okay? All right, so again, just to rehearse the campaign, the first phase of Galvez's campaign is he's simply maintaining this trade, this clandestine trade with the Patriots. And he's very, very clever about it. There's times where like an obvious shipment of military supplies arrives in New Orleans, and he'll let it be known that this is all to supply the Spanish troops in Louisiana, right? Subterfuge. When war is declared, there's a lag time. War is started, this is where I have some disagreement. Dr. Galan is 21st of June, 1779. I thought it was when the ambassador packed up and left London on the 16th of June, 1779. But, yeah, whatever. Between the 16th of June and the 21st of June, 1779. It takes fully a month before Spanish subjects in the Americas, in the Caribbean, in the New World are authorized to carry out military actions against Britain. And as soon as they get word that they can carry out these actions, Bernardo de Galvez takes his militia. Again, it's a multinational, multi-ethnic militia. He tells them to leave their tents behind, to travel as light as possible, and they literally slog through the swamp to fall on Manchac. And they get to Manchac and they take it without a shot being fired. Okay. He then proceeds to Baton Rouge, and in Baton Rouge he's faced with 550 British defenders. Some of them are Waldeckers from Waldeck in Germany. Some of them are American loyalists. And he recognizes, if I attack 550 dug-in British defenders with 13 cannons at their disposal, we're going to lose a lot of our men. So we have to figure out a way to minimize our losses. So the method that's chosen is he gets some of his Indian allies and he gets some of his other people from Louisiana to go make a lot of noise in a thicket of woods near the fort. You know, cut down trees, start building stuff, start digging trenches. And this convinces the British defenders that's where they're going to attack from. So the British turn all their attention, and during the night, the rest of his army gets to within 100 meters of the British fort, and they dig in their artillery and gun positions so that when dawn breaks, they're right there, and they're able to effectively bombard the British. The British take several hours of this bombardment, and then they surrender. And in the negotiations of the surrender, he also secures the surrender of Natchez in what's now Natchez, Mississippi. And when he gets to Natchez, Mississippi to take their surrender, the British reinforcements are literally on their way. And so he takes control of all of these positions that the British had in Mississippi before the British can effectively respond. And so this is a pretty remarkable campaign. All right. You've been very patient, and I appreciate it, but I'll try to leave time for questions and answers. Again, Dr. Galan has the actual literal primary source documents up on his presentation. I'm simply repeating what he has. Francisco Garcia, Maria de Saint-Denis, Felix Menchaca, like trying to figure out this question about the cattle, where they emanated from, where they went, when did they go there, all of that stuff. Here's the ranches. I've pegged the ranches to Texas real estate that people from Texas may be familiar with, and so you'll be like, okay, that's where, you know, the Rancho del Paisle, which is not a Spanish word, by the way. The Rancho del Paisle is, it was near, you know, Lavernia, and where all of these different ranches were at. Suffice it to say, there was the question raised in Dr. Galan's presentation, which was, how do we know the cattle got there at all? Okay, right? Well, as copious and as rich as the documentary record left to us by Spanish officials is, there are no end-user certificates for the cows. The ganado did not leave an end-user certificate. So this is a question that is going to bedevil us for a long time until we manage to unearth one or another fragment. But allow me to say this, okay? And I don't think that you'll be persuaded by what I'm about to say. I think the cattle made it. The horses I have doubts about, okay? Horse wealth was pretty important to the Comanche, and I don't think they would let an opportunity like that slip them by, okay? So I'm equivocating perhaps, but here's where I get off saying this. I think the simple fact that the Spanish army was able to carry out the successful Gulf Coast campaign through 1780 into 1781 is evidence that they had ambulatory meat walkers with them. They had cattle, providing them with hides and leather and meat and grease and tallow and horn and bone and all of the other things. Everything but the squeal, as the saying goes. They had access to ganado, to cattle, and that, you know, whether some of this, you know, like in what measure did they use this? It's an open question. The other thing, our friends from St. Bernard Parish have put me in mind about this as well, with the story about the importance of cattle to the Isleños that were settled there under Galvez. And that is this: the hurricane season in 1780 is beyond belief in destructiveness. Okay, and a lot of people, like, we're all worried about, you know, intensifying storms and Category 5 hurricanes and all this kind of stuff. There was a Category 5 hurricane, okay, that may have killed 22,000 people in 1780 in the French and British Caribbean. It destroyed 15 British warships in Barbados, okay? It tore through the Antilles. And before that storm, there was an earlier hurricane that went right squarely into New Orleans. And it destroyed Bernardo de Galvez's preparations to carry out his campaign. It killed cattle. Large numbers of cattle were killed by this hurricane. It destroyed shipping. It destroyed physical structures and sites. And so, honestly, I think that in addition to taking cattle out of the Seno Mexicano, out of the Provincia de Texas, to supply the military campaign, I think there was also a need to restock what cattle there were in Louisiana. And that's another reason that the cattle are being sent. It's you know, these guys just got off a ship from an arduous ocean journey from Tenerife and La Gomera in the Canary Islands. What do they have with them? Well, they don't have a lot of beeves, do they? So we need to get them beeves. So that's my argument. Now you can assail that later. All right. Okay. Bringing this to a close. Gibraltar, I've got a map here of the siege of Gibraltar. This is the linchpin of the Spanish war effort. This siege by the Spanish on their own and later an allied army of the Spanish and the French lasts 3 years, okay? And it's so important to Spain to regain Gibraltar that it actually holds up the peace arrangements at the end of the American Revolution for almost 2 years, okay? So the North Americans and the French are able to defeat Lord Cornwallis at Yorktown in October of 1781. And right away, the Americans and the British are talking about peace. But the treaty that the French and the Spanish have is, wait a minute, we haven't gotten our, we haven't gotten our major war aims met yet. And so the Spanish have to relinquish their claim on Gibraltar in order for the American Revolution to be brought to an end in September 1783. I'll go ahead and conclude on this slide right here. This is the siege and the storming of Pensacola. This is the signature victory in North America. By no means the only battle by far fought by the Spanish armed forces in Europe and in other contexts in Central America, in the Caribbean, everywhere. This is the greatest Spanish victory in North America, okay, 1781. And this is one of those maps that's really, really awkward because the east is the top of the map. That's not north at the top of the map. North is this way, okay? So this is literally the Bay of Pensacola. This is the town of Pensacola. These are the British fortifications at Pensacola, and they're built on hills they get progressively higher, okay? These are the siege lines that Bernardo de Galvez has laboriously dug out, where shovels and axes are as important as muskets. And they sort of agonizingly, slowly build these saps until they're 11 feet wide and 4 feet deep and covered with gabions and cover to protect people. And then they sight their guns so that they can bombard the British garrison more effectively. And the entire time, the British are counterattacking, they're trying to disrupt this work. And so it's a very hard-fought campaign. Bernardo Galvez is wounded. I mean, he was wounded fighting the Apaches, he was wounded fighting in Algeria, in northern Africa. He's wounded again very grievously in the Battle of Pensacola. And finally, on the 8th of May, 1781, we think they were French, the gunners. I mean, the Spaniards say it was their gunners, and the French say it was their gunners. We don't know. But like the Allied army fires an obus, a howitzer, and at the precise moment that the howitzer shell drops, the powder magazine is open at Fort Queen Anne because they're distributing powder to the British gunners. And so this mortar shell, this artillery shell, explodes and detonates right when the powder magazine is open, and the whole powder magazine explodes and kills probably 100 British defenders in the fort. Okay? After that, the Spanish are able to take control of the smoldering wreckage of Fort Queen Anne, and they're able to bring up their guns from where they had them before, and it's going to be point blank range and downhill from here on out. And so when the Spanish open their bombardment, it's not long before General Campbell, the British general, decides to seek terms. And so he surrenders Pensacola. So that's the story of Spain in the American Revolution, and that is the story of how Spain aided the colonists, aided the Continental Army throughout the war, and how they directly drove the British from the Gulf Coast. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So it's already 11:11. So we're gonna have a couple of questions.
Yeah, sure,
And then,
by all means.
if anybody's got something? Yes.
Can we see the slide with George Rogers Clark?
Oh, sure, I'm sorry.
Upper Mississippi River Valley.
All right, let's go back. You know, I even have a little laser pointer here, but maybe I shouldn't be trusted with that. Oh, there you are. Sorry I raced through him. Again, one of the recipients of this materiel, weapons, powder, everything, going up the Mississippi basin. You know, George Rogers Clark takes what's now, is it Vincennes in Indiana? Twice. And the second time, it had been recaptured by the British, and so he has to do it again with guile and trickery. And so he attacks during the dead of winter, and that's how he's able to take it the second time. So.
I'd like to get Joe up here and Dr. Galvez, we can take a picture together.
I just want to comment about George Rogers Clark.
Sure.
After the Revolutionary War, he was quoted as saying, without the assistance of Spain, we would still be flying the English flag.
True story.
No, it's true.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Pics are in. That's right. Where's my selfie stick?
I'll get it.